Over its 75-year history, Formula 1 has played host to the world's greatest cars and drivers. But on the flip side of that, there have been cars on the other end of the scale that didn't exactly end up in the Hall of Fame. But most of those teams can, at least, say they raced in a Formula 1 Grand Prix. That was sadly not the case for this team, the Life Formula 1 team. They hold an unwanted record of never completing a race lap, despite entering 14 different Grand Prix during the 1990 season. Back in those days, F1 was run much differently to what it is now. There were far more entries, and that meant greater safety worries. At each weekend, Formula 1 would host pre-qualifying sessions to limit how many cars could compete in a race weekend. At the first race of the season in the United States, 35 cars entered the race weekend, with only 30 allowed to compete in qualifying. One of the 9 cars in pre-qualifying was the sole live entry. Gabriele Tarquini, driving the AGS, missed out on qualifying after posting a time 3 seconds slower than fastest driver Roberto Moreno. Down in 8th place of the 9 drivers was 35.8 seconds behind Moreno at race 2 in Brazil. The live car's engine failed on its first lap after the second race, to be replaced by the Italian driver Bruno Giacomelli. But unfortunately for him, life didn't get too much easier. At the San Marino Grand Prix, Giacomelli suffered a drive belt failure on his first lap. The result was a time nearly 6 minutes slower than the fastest driver. There was at least some solace in the next race in Monaco, but not very much. Giacomelli completed 7 laps in pre-qualifying, even though he was 14 seconds off the pace. Sadly, at the beginning of the second stint, the life engine failed once again. If Monaco represented small progress, race 6 in Mexico was a disaster. Giacomelli completed his only lap, an outlap, in over 4 minutes, with a top speed that was 200 km an hour slower than the fastest car in official qualifying. Needless to say, performances did little to improve, and after failing to qualify for the 14th consecutive race in Spain, Life withdrew because of high costs. They were due to re-enter the sport in 1991 after fresh investment, but never again competed in a Grand Prix weekend. But was the Life team really as bad as results made it look? Not entirely. Life wasn't initially an F1 team, but more of a concept. Back in the 1980s, F1 cars were using turbocharged engines, with some of them reaching power outputs of 1,500 horsepower. They were so powerful that the engines had to be turned down significantly in races, simply to stop them from blowing up. So the FAA brought in a ban on turbocharged engines, forcing teams to slowly transition into naturally aspirated ones. This took place over a 4-year time period, up to 1988. Following the new restrictions, McLaren and Honda would dominate the sport, with their engines possessing more power than their rivals. New engine providers were entering F1 all the time, including luxury car designers Lamborghini. And that's where Italian businessman Ernesto Vita comes in. Vita had the idea to design a 12-cylinder engine, known as the W12. The W12 engine was commonly used in aircraft, and even land speed record vehicles. Vita's plan was to design the engine and then sell it to top Formula 1 teams, who needed to find new engines to replace their turbocharged ones. He even enlisted the support of former Ferrari engineer Franco Rocchi, who had left in 1980. The W12 was Rocchi's concept. There was, however, one major problem. No team decided to purchase Vita's engine. So he set up his own team, and so the Life team, Vita meaning life in Italian, bought a chassis from a Formula 3000 team to get started. Vita then recruited Gianni Morelli, another ex-Ferrari engineer, to design the car and to get it in racing shape in time for 1990. However, there were already problems before the first race. The live car was the heaviest on the grid, and there were concerns over the safety of the chassis. Major handling and performance issues were identified pretty early on. Vita tried recruiting former German F3 champion Bernd Schneider. Unsurprisingly perhaps, he had no interest in stepping into the car. Vita eventually settled on Giacomelli, who had spent time in F1 with McLaren, Tolman and Alfa Romeo. He'd even picked up a podium. The problem? Giacomelli hadn't raced in Formula 1 for 7 years. He admitted he only drove for life because he missed the paddock. Midway through the season, Bernie Ecclestone met with Vita to try and convince him to withdraw from the 1990 championship. But life continued, backed by a new majority owner. Italian businessman Daniele Battaglini bought 67% of the team from Vita. Life persisted with their engines for some time, but continued to suffer problems. Top speeds at some circuits were regularly in the low 200 km/h range, and Giacomelli even expressed fear that he could be hit from behind during his 7-minute lap of San Marino, simply because he was going that slowly. And while the team was just the 14 seconds off the pace in Monaco, the lap time was slower than the entire Formula 3 field that weekend. The team eventually purchased an engine from British supplier Judd, who were co-founded by ex-world champion Jack Brabham, but the team had to wait another 5 races to put the new engine on the car. Then they found that the engine did not fit within the engine cover and had to withdraw from the Portuguese Grand Prix. Life did make it to the Spanish Grand Prix with the adjustments finally finished, but Giacomelli was still nearly 17 seconds behind the second slowest competitor in pre-qualifying. That was despite hopes that the new engine might bring about some brighter days. But Vita, Battaglini and Life eventually had to call it a day. The team still hold 2 pieces of history though. Not only was Giacomelli's San Marino lap the slowest qualifying lap of all time, but the team used the final W configuration engine in Formula 1 amid the switch to V12. Nobody would hear of Life again until the car appeared, perhaps ironically, at the 2009 Goodwood Festival of Speed, having been restored. Life in F1 wasn't what Vita would have envisaged, but it perhaps was never meant to be.